Well, welcome back to another episode of The Compass. I'm here with Brad Robison, MD, and today we are tackling a huge question, the question of God. And I know, Dr. Brad, you have a lot of patients that come in, they're wrestling with this topic. And as I was talking to you earlier and going through some of your notes, there's this really good quote that you have, and it just says, if God is real, it changes everything. If God isn't real, it changes everything.
Yes.
That sums up a very complex topic that we're going to take a couple minutes today and unpack. What are your thoughts around this?
It it really does. And one of the reasons that I thought about doing this today, I mean, we're through Sacred Space Ministries, Jeremy and Pincosi and I are leading a discussion around this topic. And but why it is important clinically, one of the things that we talked about before we got started is, I mean, I love a good intellectual debate as much or more than a lot of folks, and this topic is one of those that could really be approached from a very intellectual perspective. But I think to really understand why I think it's important for me as a clinician, and why I feel like it's important for, in a sense, everybody that walks through my door, is the fact that to understand it, you have to start with an understanding of what's called the intellectual theology or worldview versus operational theology and worldview. So everybody's got a worldview, and pretty much everybody can give some sort of intellectual statement as to what they believe, or what church they go to or they don't go to, or they're theist or they're a naturalist, or they can talk about it. And some people put a lot of thought into that, and some people put almost no thought into that.
Mm-hmm.
But when they walk through my door in a crisis, their deeper operational belief systems come to the surface, and invariably they're questioning in those deep places: is there a God? Is there not a God? Those kind of things. And it just so happens that there's this great book called The Question of God that was developed by Dr. Nikolai, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, that's right. Nikolai. Yep.
Yeah, and he's a psychiatrist that was a Harvard professor for many years and taught a class at Harvard on this topic.
Yep.
And what he developed, the class started out as a class about Freud. He was asked to teach a class on Freud, but he felt like the class really took shape and became this very rich class when he structured it around essentially like a debate between Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis, who those two people, are really considered by lots of folks to be two of the greatest thinkers of the last 100 or plus years.
Yeah.
And so the book itself really does provide a great roadmap of some pretty deep thinking around this.
By the way, what an interesting hypothesis. Like, imagine Freud debating C.S. Lewis, then watch it play out in the pages of this book.
Yes.
And it certainly would lead to deep questions because of the way that they have these philosophical, just way that they are able to express the deep things of the heart.
And one really interesting thing that Dr. Nikolai points out is that it's unlike, there was never an actual debate between the two of them, and it's unlikely that they ever met, although in their journals, in particular in Sigmund Freud's journal, near his death, when he was much older, because he was quite a bit older than Lewis, an unnamed Cambridge professor came and talked to him. And so it is speculated that very well may have been C.S. Lewis, because Lewis was younger than Freud. Their paths could have crossed near the end of Freud's life and at the beginning of Lewis's tenure as a professor there at Cambridge. Lewis was very aware of Freud's writings and addressed a lot of Freud's arguments directly. So Lewis, and that's what Nikolai brings out, like Lewis did really take on a lot of Freud's perspectives directly. Freud challenged a lot of Lewis's ideas from Lewis's predecessors. So he didn't directly challenge Lewis's writings. But anyway, it does present a really interesting format for.
Do you think that Freud's the right person to have been picked that would represent some of the folks that are coming in and dealing with these issues, as opposed to like Darwin?
Yeah, I think Freud is a good one because Freud extends the, really you can trace a line of naturalism, material naturalism, back into Voltaire, and you can look at some of the philosophers, Descartes, I think therefore I am. You can look at Nietzsche, some of the existential philosophers that were atheistic existential philosophers or naturalist existential philosophers, and then you can look at Darwin and how Darwin's thought processes affected worldview, but Freud really, I think he's a good one to look at, despite modern kind of concepts and caricatures of Freud. That's one of the things, like the small group that we're taking through this book, that's one of the things that every single one of them have said. They're like, oh wow, I didn't really quite realize the depth of Freud's writings. And I sort of had a caricature idea of Freud as being sort of this weird psychiatrist that was focused on sex or something, and then when they really started to get into it, they're like, oh wow, I didn't realize how deep Freud's writings went, and how much, like, and there's people that can articulate this, Dr. Nicolai being one of them, better than I can. Pre-Freud and post-Freud, Western culture changed. Like the way we think about thinking and the way we think about the mind and the unconscious and so Freud is a good one to really look at if you're going to really have an intellectual debate about these concepts and worldview and those sort of things. Yeah.
Is the issue of morality part of the conversations that you're having? Because that's some of the conversation that takes place in this book, right? Like, is morality given or is it discovered?
Exactly. And that is such a central question. And, for folks that may be kind of tuning in and watching us on this, I'm not here to answer the question. And in fact, just so people know, I mean, definitely pick up the book, because Dr. Nicolai, I think, does a great job of really presenting the depths of the argument and let people really look at these two very different perspectives. So they represent, and they both really wrote a lot about it. I wouldn't say that they were the complete originators, but they wrote articulately about these two different positions. And we have to use a big word here, epistemology, which is, study of knowledge. And Freud articulated extensively the naturalist or materialist worldview that knowledge is only what we can observe and discover through that observation and scientific method and those sort of things. And Lewis articulates very clearly that there is a form of knowledge that is only achieved from the inside. Mm-hmm. In other words, experientially. Like there, and so some people automatically dismiss. So some people jump quickly to the idea that of a theist perspective, that there's a God and God reveals truth, and ultimately that is a theist and more specifically a Christian worldview. But Lewis really takes pains to go back and articulate that we have a lot of other examples in our day-to-day life of a revealed knowledge. I mean, the one that I use when I've led this discussion is I talk about the fact that Paula, my wife, we've been married for 40 years. I mean, she has an observational knowledge of me, in a sense. You know, she knows that I have blue eyes and a shaggy long gray beard, and and those sort of things. But she has a revealed experiential knowledge of me that nobody else has or can have, because of the intimacy of the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's one example of many others that Freud, or that Lewis uses to say, well, no, wait a minute, Freud, wait a minute, naturalists. There, even if you don't take the steps toward Christian theism from a rational mind, logical standpoint, we have lots of examples of revealed truth, experiential truth, in a sense. And then, you can debate it from a fine-tooth standpoint, but that is definitely what this book gets into. And
well, I also think that some of the things that I've had to deal with as a pastor was Freud's sort of definition of what God is sometimes is like this wishful thinking kind of genie in the sky. So then you come back, and all the time I find myself saying, like, it's not a cosmic. I've heard somebody say, I stole it. It's not a cosmic Coke machine that you can put a prayer in and get a blessing out. Like, you have to kind of unwind. Like, no, we're an object of God's creation that he created in his image. And out of a response of that, we worship him because of the love that he bestows upon. Like, that's kind of how I start to help people unpack it, versus like, no, it's like, it's a hotline that you call when you need something. It's not, that's such a narrow view.
Yeah, it is. And it's exactly right. I mean, that's another key point that Dr. Nicolai addresses in the book. And it's a really we're just going to scratch the surface of it and lay it out there for folks and maybe pique folks' interest to read the book. But that idea, I mean, that is very much a naturalistic, and Freud articulated it in very much detail in his writings, that religion, pretty much he said religion of any kind is a mass delusion. It's a wish fulfillment, mass delusion, and that he articulates some interesting things about that. He tries to go back and move beyond his understanding of the mind and into some philosophy and anthropology to articulate how that somehow developed in a naturalistic way in human culture. And it gets kind of challenging. And then at one point in his writings, he even says, well, we probably shouldn't do away with religion because I'm not sure how we would control the masses so again, it's like, well, it's kind of wish fulfillment, but maybe we need it. But I mean, that's a little bit of a caricature, but that's some of the topics that people have talked about in this study that we've been going through.
Now, I would imagine something that you have to deal with quite a bit, and even occasionally I've had to deal with, is how do you process through helping people understand the difference between what could be classified as a genuine religious encounter or experience versus like a psychological projection?
Yeah.
Because that's difficult, right? Like, I don't even know sometimes with myself. I'm like, wait a second, was that the Holy Spirit, or did I, did I kind of ramp myself up for that?
To me, that is really central to it. It's why this topic interests me from a clinician standpoint. The question that you just asked is why this topic, I think, is so relevant in all of our day-to-day lives as we're on our journeys and as we're helping people we care about on their journeys. It's a very relevant question. And there's not an easy answer. I mean, it's a part of the answer to me is the reality of why I feel like it's so critical that we build relationship with people long term, like that our job is to build relationship, because as we build relationship, we start to peel back the layers of the onion, is kind of what I often say, and we begin to peel back.
Very good quote from Shrek. I've heard that.
Yes, exactly. And you look, and and you're beginning to see, oh, well, here is some biology. Like there's some biology going on here. That's maybe it's a mood disorder. Maybe even it's a manic episode that's biologically driven, where there is some grandiose religious beliefs that are tied up in it, and we peel that back. But then you don't leave it there. Like that's something that I train, folks hear about. It's like, well, you build relationship, and you don't say, well, you just we're just going to dismiss all that, and we're going to get you on the right medicines, and you're going to no longer be manic, and you're not going to be bothered by those spiritual things. Well, my experience with that is a lot of times there's sometimes 6 months or a year for people that have had these manic, hyper religious episodes. Once they're better, it still takes them another 6 months or a year to kind of ground back to themselves, sorting out that question. Well, what was that? I thought that was this tremendous spiritual, I had one guy years and years ago. I had a guy that, climbed to the top of a mountain out west, looking over a valley, and, saw the heavens open up, and God, and all this. Now he'd also been found and brought into the emergency room because he was walking down the middle of the interstate buck naked. And, and so it's like, okay. And then, we got him better. We got him feeling better. But then it took him some time to begin to sort out, okay, what is going on with the question of God, and what was that all about? And again, there's no easy answers. I'm not, people will jump to conclusions and go, well, that was this or that was that. And my point that I'm making is walk the journey with people and help them sort out the psychology of it, the biology of it, and the spiritual comes to the forefront. What gets in the way a lot of times, well, it gets in the way, but it's also a deciding factor. This was a topic of discussion with the group last night. When we are trying to get to and control spiritual experiences, be careful. Right? Because if there's a God, I'm pretty sure I don't speak for him. I mean, another movie quote that I love, we talked about Shrek. Another movie quote that I love is from the old Rudy movie, where Rudy, the football player at Notre Dame, is talking to one of the Catholic priests there at Notre Dame, and they're having this really deep discussion. And the Catholic priest goes, well, Rudy, in all my years of deep theological study, I've come to the two core things. One, there is a God, and two, I'm not him. and like that, like when we step back and say, okay, I'm going to trust that God can and does reveal himself to people in ways sometimes that I may not fully understand. I'm going to trust that, but I'm also going to be a little skeptical of things when I feel like people are, feeling like they have the be all and end all answer to spiritual experiences, and that this is, and then especially if they're trying to control those spiritual experiences and make them happen,
Well, I like what you're saying. You mentioned a couple of things. One, something your practice specializes in is long-term therapeutic relationships. You want to have a patient with you for 20 years, 25 years, and that's some of where you get to know somebody. And you also talked about intimacy, and that's some of what happens with God, and that it's a personal relationship with the God that we believe came in flesh and is defeated death, conquered death, and is still alive. That's why we call him the true living God. And so there's an intimacy that happens from a spiritual. So it's hard. We can't even really discern that for people, but we can sort of like help them unpack the questions that need to be asked. Right.
Yeah. That's exactly how we see it. We don't feel like our job here at our office is to like teach or preach. I mean, there's a place for that. There's, you're a pastor and teacher. There's a place for teaching and preaching, but that's not our job. Our job is to create a safe place, a safe space where people can peel back those layers of the onion and explore the reality. And in that process, that goes back to that original question too, about how do you sort that step, how do you help people sort this out? Well, over time in a trusting relationship, you begin to peel back the layers of the onion and people begin to see it for themselves. They begin to go, oh, I see the biologic pattern that I'm dealing with, and I'm beginning to recognize it. Oh, I see the psychological struggles that I'm having that maybe goes back to trauma in my life. Oh, and then every once in a while they have these moments where they're like,
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, what was that? Well, that wasn't just my biology. That wasn't just my psychology. That wasn't just my emotions. That felt like hope. Like that felt like outside of me, coming into me, hope.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, what's that? Or that felt like outside of me, joy coming into me.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? And then you begin to build an
And
experience.
sometimes, like, how do I keep that too, right? And
Yeah, right.
especially when you're dealing with that trauma thing, that was another question that I wanted to bring up. Was like, how do you wrestle with personal biography and experience trauma from some of these people that create a paradigm and a lens that they view a lot of times God in a different way, either good or bad,
Oh yeah.
depending on if he's a place that they blame or a place that they run to.
Yes. Yeah. Very true. And I think you hold that very, you hold those folks and the therapeutic relationship with those individuals as truly sacred space, and you hold it, and you hold space with those folks, and you sit with them and you help them begin to explore those things, because you're exactly right. There's, trauma. I often say around here, with the clinical staff that I'm training or at various times with patients, at its core, trauma is existential. It's an existential crisis of safety, of security, of identity, of and of God. Does God exist? Is there hope in the world? Is Nietzsche right? Is it all just a struggle for power, and then the will to wield the power, and or die? So trauma at its core is existential.
You asked the question, "Who is God?" That's how we began this.
Yeah.
And so, is there a question that's important that would be, "Who is the devil?"
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think that I think we would like to think, and that's actually one of the arguments that Lewis makes in rebuttal to some of Freud's positions, especially even on the wish fulfillment idea. Because Lewis said when he was an atheist, he makes the argument that Freud's argument for him was exactly the opposite, in that he had a wish, but his wish was that God didn't exist.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want a great interferer, and he didn't want to have to deal with the fact that maybe there are forces and powers at work that we don't have complete control over, or so he makes some argument of that, and then of course, his just work that almost everybody at least has heard of, the Screw Tape Letters, he specifically addresses that process and that sense of, well, what are the forces that are at work against us?
Do you have patients, though, ever in your history, whether it was, in the ER as a pediatrician or as a psychiatrist, where you're like, this person's been overcome by something dark spiritually, like, and you just that it's not necessarily a medical condition as much?
I mean, yes and no is my answer to that. from the standpoint that I'm cautious, because I think that there's some people out, there's some view perspectives out there. Well, let me just stay within the Lewis and Freud debate. Lewis actually addresses that specific question in I think it's in his preface to the Screwtape Letters, or maybe in some of his other writings. But he says that he feels like that we're in two camps. People, culture is in two camps, that we think way too much of Satan or way too little. And I'm kind of that way too. I kind of believe that. I think I see folks that I think sometimes think way too much and probably way too little of those, those things. And again, Lewis articulates that really well, and discusses some of the the deceptions of the enemy, but also points out that in many ways that's the main power that there is deception. It's the darkness is a deception. So yeah, I think it's something that we deal with a lot, but it's kind of on that continuum.
So yeah, that's interesting. There's questions I want to ask you, but I maybe should ask you not on air. I was like, has an exorcist ever had to be called in? No, we don't need to address that. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Is there any kind of final thoughts that you want to add to it, as just kind of a bow on top, or to button it all up?
Well, I think I appreciate people, that are interested in this topic, taking a look at this book, the question of God, and looking at those things, because again, it's a very intellectual conversation to tackle into the book in some ways, but I also think it's very relevant for all the reasons that we've just briefly scratched the surface of. It's like, oh, okay, if you step back, probably to focus it, I would say, to the person that's actually grappling with the issues, and actually grappling with the question of God, and actually grappling with maybe their own traumas or their own mental health crises that have incorporated some deep uncertainties and questions of God. I would say, one, this book would be good, and two, find a good therapist and somebody that's willing to be very open about the questions of God with you, on both sides. It's sometimes not helpful for people that are, maybe too far on the side of like, well, here's your problem. If you would just pray this prayer, then all your problems are going to be, gone. I'm obviously oversimplifying it, but my point is, on both sides, be cautious about people that are too quick to dismiss the questions of God. Find somebody that's willing to sit with you in the hard and uncertain questions.
Yeah, that's good. And I think people will find a new lease on life potentially too, if they wrestle with it.
Yes. That's one of the things. That's maybe a good point for us to wrap up on, in a sense, it's what you opened our conversation with. It's what Dr. Nikolai opens the book with. Folks, despite, we all kind of want to dismiss it, because we know that if we get into an intellectual debate with somebody about God, it's just like, oh, well, this is just not going anywhere. Yeah. We all want to dismiss it. But the reality is, if there is a God, that makes all the difference. And if there's not, that makes all the difference. Like, it is a critical, mutually exclusive question.
Yeah. Great. I love it. So hopefully people enjoyed this conversation, and if God's real, it changes everything.
Yep.
If he isn't, it changes everything. And so we invite you to go on that journey. You can certainly check out that book, which I put the title and the author on the screen if you want to go check it out. The Question of God by Armand Nikolai. on Amazon, I'm assuming, right?
Yep.
So you can go pick it up on Amazon. And as always, thank you for tuning in. You can visit us at bradrobisonmd.com, or you can call 573-334-7055 to make an appointment. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Compass.